The intent of this video is to discuss the B-17 crew's attrition rates. We will also discuss how the changing attrition rates led to an increase in the bomber crew's tour of duty. I have observed lots and lots of misinformation that seemed to be passed down on social media sites regarding the loss rate of bomber crews in World War II. You hear statements like, the average life expectancy of a bomber crew member was only 4 missions, or it was statistically impossible for a bomber crew member to meet his tour of duty. Let's start by reviewing the 3 threats bomber crews faced in combat. In summary, the plane crew threats came from ground artillery flak, fighters, and other. The other category would include mid-air collisions, weather incidents, pilot error, or landing incidents while on a combat mission or sortie. The x-axis of the chart shows the month and year. The y-axis indicates the number of bombers destroyed during that month. The area in the chart indicates the number of bombers destroyed from either flak, fighters, or other. This data was extracted from a 313-page report, Army Air Force's Statistical Digest of World War II, dated December 1945. The data represents the 8th and 15th U.S. Army Air Forces. The 8th Army Air Force flew out of England and operated in the European theater. The 15th Army Air Forces flew out of Italy and operated in the Mediterranean theater. Although they sometimes coordinated and overlapped their bombing missions, the 15th Army Air Force was about half the size of the 8th Army Air Force. B-17s and B-24 bombers flew in both theaters. The data shows more bombers were destroyed by fighters rather than flak up to May 1944. After May 1944, more bombers were destroyed by flak than fighters. This shift in threat is due to several factors, including the introduction of long-range fighter escorts, Doolittle's change to a more aggressive fighter engagement policy, additional bombers available, better formation management, and attrition of the Luftwaffe from the previous months. Bomber sortie combat losses per month are outlined in this chart. The x-axis shows the month and year. The y-axis indicates the bomber loss rate during that month. The data again represents the 8th and 15th Army Air Forces and includes both B-17 and B-24 bombers. A clear drop in the bomber combat loss rates occurred around January 1944. This is coincident with General Doolittle taking over the 8th Army Air Forces and the introduction of long-range fighter escorts. There are 2 missions flown by the 8th Army Air Forces which stand out. The first is a Schweinfurt II ball-bearing mission, or Black Thursday. This chart represents the bomber losses per month or per mission. The columns indicate the percent bomber loss rate per month, and the lines represent the bomber loss rate per mission. The October 14, 1944 mission to Schweinfurt ball-bearing factory is considered one of the most devastating of the war. 28% of the bombers were lost in this mission. Losses include bombers that were damaged beyond economical repair. After this mission, all deep penetration bombing missions were halted for about 4 months, until sufficient long-range fighters became available. The second Outlier mission occurred on March 6, 1944. On this day, 730 B-17s and B-24s, escorted by over 800 fighters, headed out to bomb Berlin. The charts column indicate the daily bomber loss rate per month, and the lines represent the raw number of bombers lost. Losses include bombers that were damaged beyond economical repair. 72 bombers were lost during this March 6 raid on Berlin. More bombers were lost during this mission than in any of the other 8th Army Air Force missions. To increase morale of the bomber crews, Bomber Command introduced a combat tour of duty. Crew members who completed their tour of duty can opt to rotate back to the States. In May 1942, Army Air Forces defined a tour of duty as serving 1 year in combat. This was revised in December 31, 1942, defining a tour of duty as completing 25 combat missions. Due to the reduction in bomber loss rates, the tour of duty increased from flying 25 to 30 combat missions. This memo was released on March 4, 1944. The higher mission requirement was implemented on a sliding scale. For example, if you've already completed 20 missions, your tour of duty was defined only after completing 7 more missions. You did not have to complete the full 30. Due to even further reductions in bomber attritions, the tour of duty was satisfied after completing 35 combat missions. This memo was implemented on July 6, 1944. This date is 1 month after D-Day. The 35 mission tour of duty was not updated throughout the remainder of the war. Enclosed is a summary chart of the various tour of duty requirements and an overlay of the Memphis Belle's first and last mission. So what is the chance of bomber crew member in meeting his 25 mission tour of duty? To answer this question, we need crew loss rate data, not bomber loss rate data, or at least be somewhat confident they trend well. I could not locate any reliable bomber crew loss rate data for the European or Mediterranean theater. However, a correlation between bomber and crew loss rates is available for LeMay's 21st Army Air Forces flying B-29 bombers out of the Marianas. The graph and tabular data represent the B-29 bomber and crew loss rates as shown. The plotted data tends to correlate well, with crew loss rates equal or slightly below the bomber loss rates. This discrepancy between bomber and crew loss rates is likely due to bombers ditching or crashing on Iwo Jima, and yet the crew surviving and reporting back to duty on a new airplane. We will assume the 8th Army Air Force's crew loss rates match the available bomber loss rates in the following calculations. This chart represents the percent loss rate of various aircraft over time. The data collected indicate loss rates have gone down over the years since World War II. The loss rates for 8th Army Air Force bombers operating between January and October 1943 is 6.1%. The 6.1% bomber attrition can be calculated from the bomber combat loss rate chart. 769 of the 12,061 sorties flown were destroyed for a loss rate of 6.1%. For this period, the likelihood of a bomber crew member completing his 25 mission tour of duty is equal to 1 minus the loss rate raised to the 25th power. A crew member would have a 21% chance of completing his tour of duty. This assumes the crew loss rate is equal to the bomber loss rate. The bomber loss rate decreased to a steady low value of 1.16% in all of 1945. At a 1.16 bomber loss rate, a bomber crew member will have a 66% chance of completing their 35 mission tour of duty. Key takeaways from this presentation include: big shift in bomber loss rates occurred around December 1943. The shift from fighters to flak occurred in May of 1944. Tour of duty requirements were modified as the threats diminished. 8th Army Air Force bomber crew attrition can be calculated, but only with the caveat that crew loss rates are assumed to match the plane loss rates. The likelihood of a bomber crew member meeting his 25 mission tour of duty flying from January through October 1943 was 21%. The likelihood of a bomber crew member meeting a 35 mission tour of duty in 1945 was 66%. If you enjoyed this video, please consider commenting, liking, or subscribing to World War II U.S. Bombers.